Did you know? Not every president of the United States reached the White House through the ballot box. Throughout American history, there have been 9 presidents who ascended to the highest office in the land without ever winning a presidential election. This isn't about rigged elections or political coups. This is about the Constitution, tragedy, and historical coincidence that placed 9 men in the most powerful seat in the world, without them ever campaigning for it. Today, we're diving deep into the extraordinary stories of these 9 presidents. How did they rise to power? What happened during their terms? And why were some of them considered accidents in American political history? Let's begin this journey with the first president who was never elected, a man so controversial that his enemies refused to even call him president. In 1841, the United States faced an unprecedented constitutional crisis. For the first time in the history of this young nation, a sitting president had died in office. William Henry Harrison, the newly inaugurated president, died just 32 days after taking office. The cause? Complications from pneumonia. Some historians believe that his nearly 2-hour inaugural address delivered in cold weather without a coat may have contributed to his illness. And this is where John Tyler enters the picture. Tyler was Harrison's vice president. But when Harrison died, no one was really sure what should happen next. The young American Constitution was somewhat vague about this. Should the vice president become president? Or merely act as president? Tyler made a bold decision. He declared himself the full president, not just acting president. This decision made him extremely unpopular. His political opponents cynically called him His Accidency, His Accidental Majesty. They sent him letters addressed to Vice President or Acting President. Tyler showed his character. He returned all such letters unopened. During his term, Tyler faced enormous challenges. His own party, the Whig Party, rejected him. His cabinet resigned en masse. He became a president without a party, without congressional support, and without a mandate from the people. But Tyler persevered. He completed his term until 1845. But he knew his position. When the time came, Tyler didn't attempt to run in the next election. Tyler's legacy was constitutional precedent. His decision to assume the full presidency, rather than acting as a temporary placeholder, became the standard for all subsequent power transitions in America. 9 years after Tyler, history repeated itself. President Zachary Taylor, a popular war hero general, died suddenly after 1 year and 4 months in office. The cause? A brutal cholera attack. And once again, a vice president had to step into the wreckage. Millard Fillmore ascended to the presidency at one of the most dangerous moments in American history. The nation was being torn apart by the issue of slavery. North and South were moving toward a confrontation that would result in civil war a decade later. Fillmore faced an impossible moral and political dilemma: how to keep the nation united without betraying principles. He chose the path of compromise. Fillmore supported a series of laws known as the Compromise of 1850, a legislative package that attempted to balance the interests of slave states and free states. One of the most controversial parts of this compromise was the Fugitive Slave Act, a law requiring northern states to capture and return escaped slaves. This decision made Fillmore extremely unpopular among abolitionists. When his term ended, Fillmore hoped to continue. He wanted the Whig Party nomination for the 1852 election. But his party chose General Winfield Scott instead. Scott then lost decisively in the general election to Democrat Franklin Pierce. Fillmore returned 4 years later, this time with a different party, the Anti-Immigrant, Know-Nothing Party. But he lost again. Millard Fillmore remains one of the most forgotten presidents in American history. His term was defined by a compromise that failed to resolve the fundamental issue dividing the nation. April 14, 1865. Ford's Theater, Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln, the president who had led America through the bloodiest civil war in its history, sat with his wife watching a play. In the middle of the performance, a man named John Wilkes Booth entered his private box and shot him in the head. Lincoln died the next morning. And Andrew Johnson, his vice president, suddenly became president in the midst of an unprecedented national crisis. Johnson was an odd choice for Lincoln's vice president. He was a Southern Democrat, Lincoln was a Northern Republican. They were paired together on the Union ticket to demonstrate national unity during the war. But when Johnson became president, their ideological differences became starkly clear. The United States had just emerged from the Civil War. Slavery had been abolished. 4 million newly freed African Americans needed protection and civil rights. The devastated South needed to be rebuilt and reintegrated into the Union. This was a moment that required visionary leadership. Unfortunately, Andrew Johnson was not that leader. Johnson opposed Congress's Republican-led efforts to protect the rights of former slaves. He vetoed civil rights legislation. He pardoned former Confederate leaders. He blocked efforts to give land to freedmen. Congress grew increasingly frustrated. Tensions escalated. And in 1868, they took an unprecedented step. They impeached the president. Andrew Johnson became the first president in American history to be impeached by the House of Representatives. The charge? Violation of the Tenure of Office Act, when he tried to fire the Secretary of War without Senate approval. But impeachment is not removal. To remove a president, the Senate must convict with a 2/3 majority. In one of the most dramatic votes in Senate history, Johnson escaped removal by just one vote. A Republican senator voted to acquit him, saving his presidency but destroying his own political career. Johnson completed his term but had no hope for nomination in the 1868 election. He tried for the Democratic nomination but failed. Andrew Johnson's legacy is one of wasted opportunity. He had the chance to heal a divided nation, to protect the rights of millions of newly freed people. Instead, his policies contributed to a century of racial discrimination to come in the South. James Garfield had been president for only 4 months when a frustrated job seeker shot him at a Washington, D.C. train station on July 2, 1881. Garfield didn't die immediately. He survived 80 painful days, with incompetent doctors probing his gunshot wound with unwashed hands and instruments, likely making his condition worse. He finally died on September 19 from infection. And Chester A. Arthur became president. No one expected much from Arthur. He was a product of the corrupt New York political machine. He had never held elected office before. He was known as part of the corrupt patronage system, where government jobs were given to political friends, not the most qualified people. Even political reformers complained about Arthur's selection as vice president. One commentator wrote that only one heartbeat separated that corruption from the presidency. But when Arthur became president, something remarkable happened. He changed. Arthur shocked everyone by becoming a champion of civil service reform. He supported and signed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, legislation that ended the patronage system and introduced competitive examinations for federal government jobs. He fought corruption in his own administration. He prosecuted fraud scandals in the Post Office Department. He modernized the Navy. He vetoed bills he considered wasteful of taxpayer money. Arthur transformed from machine politician to honorable statesman. But there was one problem: Arthur's health was failing. He had been diagnosed with serious kidney disease that would eventually kill him. He kept this diagnosis secret from the public. When the 1884 election approached, Arthur campaigned half-heartedly for the Republican nomination. He didn't have enough support, and his deteriorating health made him unable to campaign vigorously. He didn't get the nomination. He retired from public life and died 2 years later at age 57. Chester A. Arthur's presidency was one of the great surprises in American history. The man least likely to become a reformer became one. September 6, 1901. Pan American Exposition, Buffalo, New York. President William McKinley was shaking hands with people at a public reception when an anarchist named Leon Zalgas approached him with a pistol hidden beneath a handkerchief and shot him twice in the abdomen. McKinley survived for 8 days before dying from infection, and Theodore Roosevelt, at age 42, became the youngest president in American history. This was bad news for the conservative political elite who had placed Roosevelt as vice president, hoping that position, considered unimportant at the time, would sideline him from politics. One Republican leader complained, "Now that damned cowboy is president." But this damned cowboy would become one of the most influential and popular presidents in American history. Roosevelt brought unprecedented energy to the White House. At 42, he was the youngest president ever to serve. He was a naturalist, hunter, writer, explorer, war veteran, and progressive reformer. And he didn't waste time. Roosevelt attacked the big trusts and monopolies that dominated the American economy. He broke up more trusts in one term than any previous president. He was dubbed the Trust Buster. He expanded executive power in international relations. He negotiated an end to the Russo-Japanese War, winning the Nobel Peace Prize, the first American president to do so. He initiated construction of the Panama Canal, one of the greatest engineering projects in human history. He created the modern national park system, protecting millions of acres of land. He championed consumer protection legislation ensuring food and drug safety. Roosevelt was so popular that he easily won the 1904 election, proving he wasn't just an accidental president, but a leader with a popular mandate. After his term ended in 1909, Roosevelt initially supported his successor, William Howard Taft. But they had a falling out, and in 1912, Roosevelt decided to run again. He won most of the states in the Republican primaries, but party leaders gave the nomination to Taft. Roosevelt, furious, formed his own third party, the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party. In one of the most dramatic campaigns in American history, Roosevelt was even shot by a madman while campaigning, but he still delivered his 90-minute speech with the bullet still in his chest. He lost to Democrat Woodrow Wilson, but Roosevelt got more votes than Taft, the only time a third-party candidate beat a major party candidate. Theodore Roosevelt is often ranked as one of America's greatest presidents. And it all started because he happened to be vice president when McKinley was assassinated. 2:30 a.m., August 3, 1923. A farmhouse in Vermont. Calvin Coolidge, Vice President of the United States, was awakened from sleep with shocking news. President Warren G. Harding had died in San Francisco from respiratory illness. There was no time to go to Washington, D.C. Coolidge had to be sworn in as president immediately. His father, who was a notary public, administered the oath of office by kerosene lamplight in their farmhouse living room. This was one of the most unusual presidential inaugurations in American history. Calvin Coolidge was nicknamed Silent Cal because of his quiet, economical manner of speaking. There are many stories about his legendary silence. A woman at a dinner party once bet she could make Coolidge say more than 2 words. Coolidge responded, "You lose." But behind his silence, Coolidge was an effective leader who guided America through the extremely prosperous period known as the Roaring Twenties. He inherited a complicated situation. The Harding administration had been marred by corruption scandals, especially the infamous Teapot Dome scandal. Coolidge had to clean up this mess and restore public trust in government. He did so with quiet integrity and competent governance. Coolidge's philosophy was simple: the business of America is business. He believed in limited government, low taxes, and giving the private sector freedom to prosper. Under his leadership, the American economy boomed. Unemployment was low. Wages rose. Industrial production increased. The stock market soared. When his first term ended, Coolidge easily won the 1924 election, securing nearly every state outside the South. He was so popular that he could almost certainly have won a third term. But in 1927, Coolidge issued a brief statement that shocked the nation. "I do not choose to run for president in 1928. No explanation. No reason given. Just a simple refusal to continue." Some historians believe that the death of his son in 1924 had removed his desire to remain in power. Others believe he saw signs of economic trouble ahead and didn't want to deal with it. Whatever the reason, Coolidge retired to Massachusetts. 1 year after he left office, the stock market crashed, triggering the Great Depression. April 12, 1945. World War II was still raging. In Europe, Allied forces were approaching Berlin. In the Pacific, America was preparing an invasion of Japan that would cost millions of lives. And then Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president who had led America through the Great Depression and most of World War II, died suddenly from a cerebral hemorrhage. Harry S. Truman, who had been vice president for only 82 days, suddenly became commander-in-chief in the midst of the most destructive global war in human history. And he knew almost nothing about the actual strategic situation. Roosevelt had never briefed Truman on major policies and military operations. Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project, the secret multi-billion-dollar effort to build the atomic bomb, until after he became president. Within months, Truman had to make some of the most important decisions in world history. Should he use the atomic bomb against Japan? This was the decision that would define his presidency and change world history. Truman was stunned by the power and destruction of this newly developed weapon. But his military advisors told him that a conventional invasion of Japan could cost 1 million American casualties, not to mention millions of Japanese lives. After deep consideration, Truman made the decision: use the bomb. On August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered 6 days later. World War II ended. But the nuclear age, with all its fears and tensions, had just begun. But Truman's decisions didn't stop there. In the following years, he launched the Marshall Plan, a multi-billion-dollar aid program that rebuilt war-torn Europe. Created NATO, a military alliance that would defend Western Europe from Soviet expansion. Recognized Israel as a new state, just minutes after independence was proclaimed. Integrated the U.S. military by executive order, ending racial segregation in the armed forces. Led America through the beginning of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Sent American troops to Korea when North Korea attacked the South. Truman was unpopular during his presidency. His approval ratings dropped to 22%, one of the lowest ever recorded. Many thought he was too aggressive toward the Soviets. Others thought he was too soft. When the 1948 election approached, almost everyone, pollsters, media, even members of his own party, believed Truman would lose to Republican Thomas Dewey. The Chicago Tribune even printed an edition with the headline, "Dewey defeats Truman," before all votes were counted. But in one of the most stunning upsets in American election history, Truman won. The famous photo of Truman grinning broadly, holding up the newspaper with the wrong headline, became one of the most iconic images in American politics. Truman served his second term and then retired to Missouri. He decided not to run again in 1952, ending 20 years of Democratic rule. In the decades following his presidency, Truman's reputation has grown dramatically. Historians now routinely rank him among the greatest presidents in American history. His decisions, though controversial, shaped the post-war world and helped create a global order that lasted for decades. And it all started because FDR died, and a man from Missouri who never expected to be president suddenly had to make decisions that would change world history. November 22, 1963. Dallas, Texas. President John F. Kennedy was riding in an open convertible, waving to cheering crowds. Beside him was his wife, Jackie. In front of them were Texas Governor John Connally and his wife. And then, at 12:30 p.m., shots rang out. Kennedy was shot in the head. He was rushed to Parkland Hospital, but efforts to save his life failed. At 1 p.m., he was pronounced dead. 2 hours later, aboard Air Force One still on the Dallas tarmac, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president. Beside him stood Jackie Kennedy, her pink dress still stained with her husband's blood. This was one of the most traumatic power transitions in American history. The nation was in shock. Mourning. Afraid. Some worried this was the beginning of a coup or larger conspiracy. Johnson had to immediately stabilize the nation and assure the world that the American government still functioned. But Johnson wasn't just a caretaker. He had an ambitious agenda, more ambitious than almost any president in American history. Johnson wanted to complete what Kennedy had started. And then he wanted to go further. Much further. In his first address to Congress, Johnson outlined his vision, the Great Society, an America without poverty, without racism, with education and healthcare for all. And in the first 2 years of his presidency, Johnson achieved more legislative change than almost any other president. Civil Rights Act of 1964, the most comprehensive legislation to end racial discrimination since Reconstruction. It ended segregation in schools, workplaces, and public facilities. Voting Rights Act of 1965 ended barriers to voting that had disenfranchised African Americans in the South. Medicare and Medicaid created healthcare for the elderly and the poor. Immigration and Nationality Act ended discriminatory quota systems that had restricted immigration from Asia, Africa, and Southern Europe. Elementary and Secondary Education Act, massive federal investment in public education. Head Start, early childhood education program for low-income families. PBS, created the public broadcasting system. The list of legislative achievements continued. Johnson signed over 200 major bills in 5 years. Many historians consider Johnson the most effective legislator ever to become president. His experience as Senate Majority Leader gave him deep understanding of how Congress worked and how to pass legislation. He used every trick in the book, persuasion, intimidation, bargaining, promises, threats, to pass his agenda. This was dubbed the Johnson treatment. In the 1964 election, Johnson defeated Republican Barry Goldwater in a landslide, winning 44 states and over 60% of the popular vote. Now he had his own mandate. He was no longer the accidental president. But then everything started to fall apart. Vietnam. Kennedy had sent military advisors to Vietnam to help South Vietnam fight communist insurgents. Johnson dramatically escalated America's commitment, eventually sending over 500,000 troops. The war became a disaster. Thousands of American soldiers died. Costs exploded, draining resources from Great Society programs. Anti-war protests swept the nation. Johnson became trapped. He couldn't win the war, but he couldn't withdraw without appearing weak during the Cold War. The war consumed his presidency. It overshadowed all his domestic achievements. It destroyed his popularity. By 1968, Johnson's approval rating had collapsed. Anti-war protesters chanted, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" When primary season began, Johnson barely won New Hampshire against anti-war challenger Eugene McCarthy, a shocking result for a sitting president. And then, on March 31, 1968, Johnson made a stunning announcement: "I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president." Johnson withdrew from the race. He didn't even try to win a second full term. Why? Some say he was exhausted. Some say he knew he couldn't win. Some say he wanted to focus on ending the war without political considerations. Johnson retired to his Texas ranch and died in 1973, just 4 years after leaving office. His legacy is deeply complicated. On one hand, his domestic achievements, civil rights, Medicare, education, transformed American society and improved millions of lives. On the other hand, Vietnam was a catastrophic failure that cost tens of thousands of American lives and devastated an entire nation. Lyndon Johnson showed that even an unelected president could achieve extraordinary things, but also that no amount of political skill can overcome a fundamentally flawed policy. August 9, 1974. The Watergate scandal had consumed American politics for 2 years. President Richard Nixon, facing certain impeachment and removal from office, became the first president in American history to resign. And Gerald Ford, who had been vice president for only 8 months, became president. But Ford's path to the presidency was even more unusual than the other unelected presidents. He was the only president in American history who was never elected either president or vice president. Here's how it happened. In 1973, Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, resigned in disgrace after being caught in a corruption scandal. Nixon nominated Ford, then House Minority Leader, as the new vice president under the 25th Amendment. Then, less than a year later, Nixon himself resigned. And Ford became president. Ford inherited a nation in crisis. Watergate had shattered Americans' trust in government. The Vietnam War had finally ended but left the nation divided and traumatized. The economy was struggling with inflation and recession simultaneously, a condition called stagflation. Ford's first task was healing. In his inaugural address, he famously said, "My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over." But 1 month later, Ford made the most controversial decision of his presidency. He pardoned Richard Nixon for all crimes he may have committed while president. The reaction was explosive. Ford's approval rating dropped 21 points overnight, the largest single drop in presidential approval ever recorded. Many Americans believed Ford had made a corrupt bargain, that Nixon had agreed to resign in exchange for a pardon. Ford insisted he pardoned Nixon to help the nation move forward, to avoid years of trials that would keep the country focused on Watergate. "I believe that the buck stops here," Ford said, "that I cannot rely upon public opinion polls to tell me what is right." Whether you agree with his decision or not, there's no question it was politically courageous. Ford knew the pardon would be extremely unpopular, but he did it anyway because he believed it was right for the country. Ford served out the remainder of Nixon's term. When the 1976 election came, he sought his own term. He narrowly defeated Ronald Reagan for the Republican nomination, one of the closest primary battles in modern history. In the general election, Ford faced Democrat Jimmy Carter. It was extremely close, but Ford lost, partly due to lingering anger over the Nixon pardon, partly due to economic troubles, and partly due to a series of campaign gaffes. The most famous gaffe came during a debate when Ford said, "There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe." This was obviously false. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe completely. Ford's advisors were horrified. Ford lost the election by just 2 percentage points. He remains the only president to serve without ever being elected to either the presidency or vice presidency. After leaving office, Ford remained active in politics and public life. Over time, many Americans came to appreciate his decency, honesty, and willingness to make unpopular decisions for what he believed was the country's good. When Ford died in 2006 at age 93, even those who had disagreed with his pardon of Nixon acknowledged that he had helped heal the nation during one of its darkest periods. So there you have it, 9 men who became President of the United States without being elected to that office. Ford ascended after assassinations, Tyler after Harrison's death from illness. Wait, actually Tyler came after Harrison died of pneumonia, not assassination. Let me correct that. Ford ascended after their predecessors died of illness or natural causes. John Tyler, Harrison, pneumonia. Millard Fillmore, Taylor, cholera. Calvin Coolidge, Harding, respiratory illness. Harry Truman, FDR, cerebral hemorrhage. Ford ascended after assassinations. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln. Chester Arthur, Garfield. Theodore Roosevelt, McKinley. Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy. And one ascended after resignation. Gerald Ford, Nixon. What can we learn from these accidental presidents? First, the Constitution's succession system works. Despite tragedies, crises, and political chaos, power has always transferred peacefully. No vice president has ever refused to step up. No coup has ever been attempted. Second, some of history's most consequential presidents were never elected. Truman made the decision to use atomic weapons. Johnson passed landmark civil rights legislation. Theodore Roosevelt transformed American foreign policy and conservation. These weren't caretaker presidents, they were transformative leaders. Third, being unelected didn't stop these men from taking bold action. Tyler set the precedent for vice presidential succession. Arthur reformed the civil service. Johnson pushed through the Great Society. They didn't wait for permission or worry about their lack of an electoral mandate. Fourth, presidential character matters more than how someone gets the job. Chester Arthur surprised everyone by rejecting the corruption that had defined his career. Andrew Johnson disappointed everyone by refusing to protect freed slaves. The office revealed who these men truly were. Fifth, history is filled with what-ifs. What if Harrison hadn't given that long inaugural speech in the cold? What if Booth's pistol had misfired? What if Nixon had burned the tapes? Small moments can change everything. Today, the 25th Amendment provides clear procedures for presidential succession and temporary disability. But the basic principle remains the same: if the president cannot serve, the vice president becomes president, fully president, not acting president, not provisional president. This is Tyler's legacy. He fought to establish that principle in 1841, and it has guided every transition since. 9 times in American history, the nation has needed someone to step up unexpectedly. 9 times, despite personal flaws and political challenges, these men took the oath and did the job. Some succeeded spectacularly. Some failed miserably. Most fell somewhere in between. But all 9 proved something essential about American democracy: the system is bigger than any individual. The presidency continues. The government functions. Power transfers peacefully. As Gerald Ford said in his inaugural address, our Constitution works. Our great republic is a government of laws and not of men. These 9 unelected presidents, from Tyler's, his accidency, to Ford's pardon, proved that truth. They were accidents of history. But they became part of history. And that's the story of the presidents who were never elected. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into presidential history, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment telling us which of these 9 presidents surprised you most. And check out our other videos exploring the fascinating stories behind American history. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most important leaders are the ones nobody expected.